Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 225.
And that's when I started asking the question, what is good leadership?
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Sunnie Giles. Sunnie is the author of The New Science of Radical Innovation and founder of Quantum Leadership Group, a program based on her breakthrough research which transforms leaders into ones that fit to deliver radical innovation. She has an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and a PhD in systems psychology, marriage, and family therapy. She's a TEDx speaker on radical innovation and an advisor for the Stanford Business School Institute of Innovation and Developing Economies. Her global leadership research was published on Harvard Business Review and has columns in Forbes magazine. Grounded on solid leading-edge research, she helps catalyze leaders to produce radical innovation by harnessing VUCA. Welcome, Sunnie.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to hear.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear more about your research in your new book, The New Science of Radical Innovation, the 6 competencies leaders need to win in a complex world. However, before we get into all of that, can you please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, I live in Utah and I was born and raised in Korea. So I came here to go to school in college as a college student. And I ended up staying here and now I'm an American citizen.
Well, that's exciting. Do you have a family or anything like that then?
Yeah, I have one daughter. She is 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
She's in high school. So I empathize with all the parents that are struggling with teenagers.
It's definitely a fun adventure for sure.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear some background into the why behind your message of your book, The New Science of Radical Innovation. What do you mean by radical innovation, first off?
So, there are 2 different types of innovations. One is radical, the other one is incremental. Radical innovation is the kind that produces minimum 10x improvements, whether it be customer experience, cost, revenues, or speed, convenience, whatever it is. It needs to deliver a minimum 10x improvements on the current experience. Otherwise, the customer will not feel like it is differentiated enough to be radical. So if you want to produce radical innovation, you need to shoot for 10x improvements on the current performance. The second thing is that it has to be a fundamentally different solution than what there is currently. So when I say fundamentally different, how value is created currently. So if you look at the entire value chain, and find a way to differentiate your products fundamentally from the existing solutions. That is a second condition to meet. And the third condition is that it has to be a platform, meaning it's a foundation, a framework upon which other incremental, complementary products and services can build their offerings on. So those 3 conditions define innovation to be radical. And anything that doesn't satisfy all 3 of those conditions are incremental.
Well, that's great. What helped inspire you to be able to move in your passion in this direction of, figuring out these 6 leadership skills that we needed in our world? I mean, what was the kind of the background to that?
Well, so I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and one day I was tasked with presenting a global brand marketing strategy for a sub-brand within that corporate brand. So my colleagues and I huddled together. We developed the strategy based on other people's input as well as research. We spent about 3 weeks putting it all together. And so we huddled around a conference room and we sent the deck to our boss's boss. And then and then she dialed in for the conference call. And then we huddled in our conference room. And then so I started taking her through the deck, 3 pages into it. And she goes, Sunnie, I have more knowledge under my big toenail than you do in the brain of yours.
Oh, wow.
When I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, what did I really hear what I thought I heard? And I was like shocked, flabbergasted. And the guy that was sitting next to me, he was the director of product development, and he hurriedly muted the phone and he said, oh, we forgot to warn you. That's her standard line. She says that to everybody. And that's when I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe what's happening. So, this was not a mom and pop shop. It was a Fortune 500 company. And when somebody treats their people like that and still gets away with it, and in fact, I want to say they because I don't want to disclose the identity of this person. So it's not he or she. So it's they, okay? They said they could do such a thing and still get away with it. And I started talking to some people about that, and to my surprise, I found out that everybody had very similar experiences. And in fact, her assistant told me that she had never seen anybody. She had never seen so many grown men walking into somebody's house and coming out crying. And it's just that I found out that was the way that she manages the organization. And she ruled with an iron fist. But she was untouchable because she was delivering results. And that's when I started asking the question, what is good leadership? If it's good leadership, if you're nice and then liked by everybody, but if you don't deliver results, is that good leadership? It's not, obviously. But what does the result mean? So that's when I started my quest for defining, good leadership in today's organization. And then I did global leadership research to find out, what people viewed as good leadership and how that ties into what kind of results we need to look at. So that's how I got started.
Well, that's great. And do you kind of want to go back into some of the nuts and bolts of that research of the 6 ideas behind good leaders in a complex world?
Yeah, so there are 6 competencies, and at the very bottom is self-management. What that means is that in other leadership development programs, it could be called personal leadership, and that's almost an afterthought. When you have mastered or have done a good job with real quote unquote leadership, then you can allocate some time to develop personal leadership. But I completely disagree with that approach. The most important thing is for leaders to manage themselves so that they can be a safe person for people around him or her. So the reason why you need to manage yourself as a leader is so that you can manage your emotions, you can manage your thoughts, you can manage your behaviors. When you do those things, you become a safe person for people around you. When you provide safety, which is the second competency, this first competency at the very bottom of the pyramid is self-management. Second competency on top of that is self-management, safety. When you can provide safety for people around you, then when people feel safe, they can freely go out and explore different options, different things, different worlds. And that it's called differentiation. When you do that, differentiation encompasses letting people self-organize, so being their own people and maximizing diversity of thought. When you maximize diversity of thought and let people self-organize, then they come up with some brilliant solutions in unconventional ways that you haven't thought about. And that becomes the seed for radical innovation. And then that's the third competency is differentiation. The fourth competency is connection. So when you combine all those differentiated parts together, then you form a very fulfilling, cohesive connection. And that's what provides that fire, so to speak, that ignites radical innovation. And then once you do that and if people feel safe enough, they feel connected enough, then they can tap into their learning capacities. And by experimenting different things and learning by trial and error through simple rules, that's the fifth competency is all about learning. And then the last is radical innovation. Radical innovation is a serendipitous result of many self-organizing employees learning from trial and error, following simple rules. So that's how the whole thing happens. That's the process of radical innovation.
And that makes a ton of sense because you have employees that feel safe to come to you and share those ideas, even though they may sound silly to them or, whatever.
Right.
They can explore a little bit more. And then, like you said, that gets to the nuts and bolts of that really radical, lighting that spark to be able to get those innovations done. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So in your bio, we talked a little bit about VUCA. What is it and how can leaders and organizations take advantage of it without being overwhelmed?
VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That is the acronym they started in the military a couple of decades ago, and now it's starting to catch fire in the business world because there's the huge implications to businesses these days. So what that means is that VUCA means that things are very unpredictable and rapidly changing, and which is the environment today.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
And when businesses face those difficult environment, it's very hard, sometimes almost paralyzing for leaders to make decisions now because you can't see what's going to happen as a consequence of your decision that you're making now. And, as a leader, you are being paid to make decisions. But when you can't predict the consequences of your decisions 3, 4, 5 steps away, that makes it very, very challenging.
I'll say.
So when you look at what's driving VUCA, there are 3 forces that are making it very, very difficult. I should say 4 forces that are. When you look at what's making it difficult for leaders, is that there are 4 forces behind VUCA. Which is first of all, there are a variety of input. New variables are coming into the decision-making space every day. New technologies, new political instabilities, new, ramifications from one part of the world that's affecting you through a ripple effect, tomorrow. Those are new variables coming into the decision-making space every day. So that's one. Number 2 is the speed of interaction is accelerating. Things are happening a lot faster. Number 3 is increased interdependence, meaning there's so many new things coming into play, but they are all interdependent and the interdependencies are increasing. And the 4th is that density of interactions. Those things that all combined together create astronomical and exponential combinations and permutations of things that you need to consider, and they're all interdependent. That's why things are very, very difficult for leaders to make decisions today. And so if you look at those things and then think about how to harness VUCA, it's actually the same forces behind VUCA that are behind radical innovation. So that this is the most important lesson they need to learn, is that the leaders need to learn, is that the same forces behind VUCA are the ones behind radical innovation. So the 4 forces that I mentioned that are making it difficult for leaders are the ones that they need to harness to create radical innovation. So what that means is that they need to increase the speed of interaction. So how do you increase the speed of interaction? You remove any frictions in communication in your team. You make everything completely transparent. You let them use simple rules instead of giving them precise instructions so they don't have to check in with you, which slows things down. And increase the variety of input. How do you do that? You need to increase the pool of diverse thoughts. So what that means is that you need to increase diversity in your team. Diversity is not about compliance. It's about strategy. So creating an environment where every thought can be heard and produce a maximum number of different ideas to start with. That is creating diversity, creating diverse pool of thoughts. So that's how you do harness the second one. And then the third one is increased interdependencies. So how do you increase interdependencies among everybody in your organization? You need to make it a more cohesive team and also create an ecosystem with other suppliers and vendors and partners and customers where everybody's are dependent on each other. So creating an entire ecosystem that increases interdependencies among all constituencies involved. And then the 4th one is the density of interactions. How do you increase density of interactions? You house everybody in a very confined space with no cubicle walls, and you have to be interacting with each other. That's one way. That's one way to create density of interactions. So when you harness those 4 things, that form the primordial soup for radical innovation. And radical innovation happens by accident when you provide that environment.
We hear a lot about, especially in business and different other situations, about delegation and kind of their decentralization of decision making and things like that. And those are all kind of, I mean, they're nice to hear corporate slogans that we hear. You know, we're a company that honors individual innovation and stuff like that. But how do you really create that ongoing process where you can make this innovation occur a lot more often?
So decentralization is, in my radical innovation language, a self-organization, and it's a critical element that they need to have, because, like I said, radical innovation cannot come from a planned or pre-programmed approach. It has to be accidental, and to be accidental, everybody has to be self-organized, meaning they cannot follow pre-written instructions or precise guidance. They have to be their own agent. So in that sense, decentralization, delegation, or those things they're not just nice to hear catchphrases. They are essential for radical innovation.
Well, and I would imagine, like, when you're first trying to research this and stuff, there's got to be some type of paradigm change that you feel like you've had over time and with experience from that first interaction with the leader who, makes everybody cry to now. What do you think that the one thing that maybe really helped change your paradigm in this direction?
Well, it's because I've watched Circuit City go out of business. Blockbusters go out of business. There are so many people, so many organizations that went out of business because they could not adapt to the new environment. And that's when I realized that any leadership development and the definition of good leadership has to be tied to the environment. You have to adapt to the changing environment. That was one of the key elements of good leadership. Another thing is that the results that it needs to tie to has to be innovation. So, I'm sure Circuit City or Blockbusters had their internal leadership development programs, but they all ended up going bankrupt. It's not because they didn't have good leaders. They did, but not. Number one, the goal of the leadership development was not tied to adaptation to the environment. And number two, it wasn't tied to the bottom line result of delivering innovation. If they had developed leaders that are constantly innovating, they wouldn't have been in the same place. They wouldn't have a fate of going bankrupt. So there are critical elements that need to be included in the definition of good leadership. So those are some of the things that I mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think that this is somewhat of an educational problem in that, one of your first competencies for leaders was that that this comes from like an eternal, like introspective type of place where they can control their own
self-management.
Yeah, their self-management, their emotions and different things like that. So they're not, they help spawn this environment. But I mean, how do you kind of create this in the organization so that you see businesses that can flex and change with the times? Because like you said, we want to create individuals who are self-managing, but so much of our education isn't that way at all, that we tell people
Correct.
What to do and we expect that.
Right.
And then we kind of almost create robots because the people are so, your employees are so used to hearing what to do. How
Right.
can you create,
Right.
how can you
Yeah.
transform those companies so that they're a lot more, produce this radical innovation?
A sign of evolution and more of an evolved state is that the agents that constitute the organism, the entire system, are being asked to live a higher law. Under my leadership development framework, they are being asked to live a higher law, meaning they need to be self-organized, meaning there needs to be trust. You need to trust people that they will take care of their time and efforts and energy in the way that maximizes a company's goals. And when people are trusted, they rise up to the trust. And it takes a lot of discipline from the leader's part to let them self-organize. And another aspect of higher law is that you need to develop an ecosystem instead of exploiting the system and just, viewing the entire playing field as a, zero-sum game where my gain is your loss and vice versa. You can't, those are all, you can no longer operate with that mind frame and succeed in today's environment. So in a way, yes, I am asking my leaders to live a higher law in many aspects. And that's how you are going to, develop a environment where radical innovation can happen.
Before we go on, please listen to this message. If you enjoy this content, you can help us with as little or as much as you'd like over at patreon.com/The Luminous Mind. These funds help us to continue to produce illuminating content with needed equipment and resources to spread the message of changing the educational paradigm. We appreciate all the ways our listeners help us continue this effort through patreon.com/The Luminous Mind by expanding exclusive content, giving away gifts, and giving patrons first seen products at patreon.com/The Luminous Mind. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Sunnie Giles, showing us the new science of radical innovation. Well, and they are the example for the people that are kind of working under the people that they're trying to lead, correct? I mean, they
Correct.
have to set the stage. Yeah, set the stage of what they're expecting. And then, like you said, have that trust that that example will lead them more so than, than telling them what to do or
Right.
or checking on them or micromanaging them type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, and I'd love to hear maybe best practices for organizations that you've been with that help develop future leaders. Because I would imagine, that these are traits that kind of have to be brought up. I mean, and to keep your business from going under, like we talked about with Best Buy and some of those things, that a lot of that.
Best Buy didn't go under. It's Circuit City.
Circuit City. Yeah, Circuit City. What was the other one that you mentioned, though? Blockbusters. I mean, but the organization actually has to have a healthy culture to be able to create future leaders. Is that correct? Like, what are some of the best practices for that?
So, well, I don't want to talk about one client but there are certain characteristics that a lot of those successful, innovative companies share. Those common DNA traits, so to speak. That is that there's like lack of hierarchy. There is some hierarchy because you need to have some hierarchy, but it's very, very flat. So, between the CEO and the lowest person in the company could be maybe 4, layers, 3 or 4 layers, whereas traditional, companies, it could be maybe over 10, maybe sometimes.
Wow.
So that the flatter hierarchy, and the level of self-organization, letting people organize and the trust that they will deliver, and let them organize their own time. So that's another one. And also, for example, they have weekly one-on-one meetings of like 50,000 people all over the world. That in a traditional hierarchy, that is like a bona fide balkable offense. That's a waste of time, waste of resources. And I know how can communication happen?
Your message gets lost for sure.
Yeah,
right?
with 50,000 people dialing in and all one meeting. But that's how successful Silicon Valley tech giants manage their communication. You get it straight from the horse's mouth. That's another differentiation.
Yeah,
differentiating factors.
Well, and when you're talking about those different layers, it kind of reminds me of that kids game where you go around and you tell somebody, you whisper something, but the bigger your circle is, the message totally gets lost.
Exactly.
And that's kind of, I guess what I'm getting for, so if you keep those layers of the message has to go through down, then it doesn't get lost, right? I mean, you're able to harness that, the idea. Okay.
Exactly. So anything that you do has to, it has to be designed to increase those 4 forces behind VUCA. And those all the practices, if you look at what Silicon Valley tech giants are doing, they're all designed to increase those four things, one of those four things or more.
So do you feel like there's a way that they can balance oversight, like with that self-organizing team that we talked about, where it can give them, be sure,
absolutely,
the long-term focus that stays intact?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're touching on a very important point. It's the balance of self-organization and connection. So connection is what provides the cohesive direction for the many self-organizing employees. So if you just leave them alone, then it's going to create chaos. Everyone go in different direction. But you need to have a cohesive direction, and that's what can you do to provide a cohesive direction for all those self-organizing employees. Number one is that the brand essence. What does the brand stand for? What is on brand? What's off brand? In successful companies, the CEO, managing the brand is not a marketing department's job. It's everyone's job. And then CEO is the chief brand guardian of that company. So everybody, knows what the brand stands for, and in anything and everything they're doing has to be consistent with what the brand stands for. And then the second thing is the mission, vision, and strategy. So it gets repeated almost, it gets repeated tirelessly. And so everybody's clear on where the company is going. It gets repeated in every meeting. It gets repeated in every event. So people know, okay, this is where we're going. So we don't lose sight of what we're doing. So the third mechanism is simple rules. And using, so for example, if A happens, then do B, that type of thing. So, that kind of a simple rules not only expedite decision making, but also it provides a cohesive direction for everybody to follow. Because every time you don't have to think about when a certain situation happens, you don't need to think about what to do. You just go. And then that everybody's doing the same thing. So those are the mechanisms behind how a leader can provide cohesive direction for the entire company.
Oh, that's great. So, to kind of reiterate, so we keep the mission and the direction of the company, always reiterating that. And then also when using
the brand essence, brand as the cohesive guideline.
Yeah. And then you have very simple rules of how things are instructed. I think that would create, that goes back to that safe environment that we talked about before, that, if there's those simple rules that nobody's going to get confused about, like, they've been told 40 different ways of doing something in the past, and, it makes it confusing. But it does help so that there's quicker turnaround for sure. Let's talk a little bit about diversity. What are some, advantages that you see to having diversity in a business organization?
Well, it's not just an advantage, but it's essential, like I said earlier, essential to creating radical innovation, because you need to start with a diverse pool of thoughts. And when you have a stereotypical, a team, whether it's white male team or male Indian team that comes from India in a tech company, if you have just one type of thinking pattern, you're not going to have as much of a chance to produce radical innovation. You just need to pull, different heuristics into the same place.
Yeah. And what can often happen a lot of times is that we're all trying to, tell the leader kind of what they want to hear. Correct. That's one of the struggles, I would think. Of why you have to have that safe, environment, because if it's not safe and you're all, okay, what does this guy really want to hear? You're not going to get the diversity of thought too. Correct. Yeah,
exactly. So what you're describing is creating an environment ripe for groupthink.
Yeah.
So thinking. That's how the spaceship Challenger disaster happened, because everybody was forcing to, voice one opinion. They were all, being forced to just voice one opinion. And that's what happens, when you have just one thought instead of multiple thoughts with equal merit, and you think about everything.
Yeah, with a lot of different backgrounds, like you said. So that you have that diversity. So do you feel like in leadership, do men or women have an advantage over the other?
So I want to say, it's not men or women who there is So what's more important is that if you are practicing those 6 groups of competencies, that's going to make a big difference. But what my research also found is that women tend to be naturally demonstrating the competencies of nurturing and making it safe for people around them. This is a very gross generalization, but if the women were actually tapping into their innate nature of nurturing and making it safe for people around them, I think women could have a better advantage by doing that, by tapping into their natural instincts.
Well, and a lot of times women are almost better communicators too, like that, they don't.
Right. Well, again, those are very, very gross generalizations, but I would agree there is a tendency for that. But again, leadership is a leader is nurtured, not born. Even if you don't think you have innate natural leadership competencies, you can develop all these things. And my book talks about how to develop those competencies.
Oh, that's great. And just takes a lot of humility, I would imagine, to be able to become a leader and to change, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and I'd like to hear maybe some personal habits that you feel like would be great for us to get started on to kind of take these competencies of leadership. We talked about that first base of being able to control your own emotions. I mean, where do you feel like we can start?
Yes, I think one practice I want to recommend to all the leaders is to be mindful, becoming mindful of every moment and being conscientious and choosing their response, choosing their thoughts, choosing their actions, instead of just mindlessly following what comes natural.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes we were talking about the men and the women. I know sometimes women can be a little bit more emotional, and so that might be a disadvantage for them, that they're not as mindful or conscientious of the emotions that might be going on. So really getting a good grasp on that would be, like we said, we're doing some generalizations for sure.
Right, exactly. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because again, if you're saying women are naturally they're more emotional. Mm-hmm. Yeah, emotions are what connection is made of, and connection is what you need as a leader to put all those diverse individuals together. So that can be an advantage on that way as well. So I don't think gender is going to be makes a big difference. It's just that how conscientious how consciously you actually develop those competencies.
That's great. Well, I'd love to hear what you're the founder of Quantum Leadership Group. What are some things that you're doing kind of in your long-term future, and what's that working into a legacy for you? How does that work into a legacy?
Well, so the reason why I wrote the book, The New Competency of Radical and the New Science of Radical Innovation, is that I wanted to provide a cohesive framework. There's so many things that people need to think about, to be a good leader. That's why I came up with that, framework. And it also not just talks about the framework, but it gives a solid scientific background and theoretical foundation, as well as tangible tools they can use to develop those competencies. And that's going to be my legacy. When I wrote that book all along, I felt like that was my reason for being on this earth. And I do hope that it can change people's lives.
Yeah. And we're, like you said, the world is just getting more complex, and we've got to be able to flex and move with the complexities and the change, that if we don't learn how to harness these innovations or these competencies or these things that with our leadership skills, that we can be left in the dust in a way. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's definitely a needed thing in our world today, for sure. I'd love to hear, do you have any parting words for our listeners? And then give us your contact information so that they can find your book as well as your website.
Yes, it doesn't matter where you are today. Just starting today would be a good step. Becoming aware of what's necessary to produce radical innovation. And actually, a lot of the feedback I get from many people is that when they practice these competencies, not only do they become a better leader at work, but they become better people and they become happier. So I would encourage everyone to start using these practices regardless of where they are today. And you can find me on sunniegiles.com, www.sunniegiles, sunniegiles.com. And you can also find me on Amazon. Just go into Amazon and search Sunnie Giles, Sunniegiles, and then my book will pop up. You can also connect with me on Twitter.
That's great. Well, and once again, we've been speaking with Sunnie Giles, author of the New Science of Radical Innovation and the founder of the Quantum Leadership Group. Her website is sunniegiles.com. She's got a great new book, and you can actually go there at book.sunniegiles.com. We're going to be sure to link all that information, including her Twitter handle and some of those things, on our website as well. But thank you so much, Sunnie, for coming on and helping to light our minds on fire on this really important topic of innovation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Sunnie Giles, go to our show notes at luminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and help us continue production of illuminating content by sponsoring us at patreon.com/The Luminous Mind to get exclusive content. Subscribe on YouTube, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content, tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.